What's so funny? You guys were laughing. What did I miss? You're naming your bicycle? All right, I'm not going to go any further there. All right, I have several things to get through. You can see by the stack, so ask your forbearance here as I work my way through these things. On Jordan, we condemn in the strongest terms this morning's attack in Jordan, which we understand killed 6 members of the Jordanian security forces and wounded another 14. We express, of course, our deepest condolences to the victims and to their families, and ask that everybody remember that those families are in grief today. We are going to continue our unwavering support to the Jordanian armed forces, and we are proud of that partnership. We join the Jordanian people in their resilience and their determination in dealing with the threat posed by Daesh. The U.S. is committed to providing security assistance to Jordan and will continue to cooperate closely in the wake of this attack. Jordan has already made tremendous sacrifices in hosting hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees, and as I've said many times, what's going on in Syria is not a philosophical exercise for the Jordanians. It is very real because of the threat posed, as we saw today, but also represented by the work that they're doing to help so many refugees. We are committed, of course, to working with Jordan to address this crisis and to ensure that humanitarian support continues to be provided to all those displaced by the conflict in Syria. Speaking of those displaced by conflict, in light of recent events in Iraq and in response to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees' recent appeals for emergency needs in Fallujah, the United States of humanitarian assistance that will be announced later this year. So there's more aid coming. And I would note that more than 3.3 million Iraqis have been internally displaced since 2014. More are expected to flee in the coming days and weeks. And we've seen this, as I said, in Fallujah specifically. In fact, the UN estimates that about 85,000 people have already fled Fallujah. Yesterday we talked about upwards of 80,000. The UN estimate now is 85,000. The UNHCR has identified camp coordination and camp management as well as protection as its most urgent priorities in the Fallujah response. Other immediate needs include water and sanitation, shelter, and food. Humanitarian agencies are responding to the crisis, but more funding is urgently needed, and we urge other governments to contribute generously to the UN's Iraq appeals, as we have done. On a travel note for Undersecretary Shannon, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Tom Shannon, is traveling to Caracas today. He'll be there today and tomorrow at the request of the Secretary and at the invitation of the government of Venezuela. Ambassador Shannon will follow up on the June 14th meeting between Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Rodriguez at the OAS General Assembly in Santo Domingo. Ambassador Shannon will meet with several senior government officials, members of the opposition, and civil society. I do not have a full readout of every individual that he's meeting with. He just got there, but we'll be able to read out his visit in more detail later. On other scheduling notes here, Secretary Kerry will join hundreds of entrepreneurs and investors at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit later this week in Palo Alto. He'll be opening up the summit on Thursday morning, as well as meeting with entrepreneurs and experiencing new technology on the sidelines of the summit. The summit will be the 7th installment in a series previously hosted by the United States and governments of Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Malaysia, Morocco, and Kenya. In bringing the summit back to the United States, and with it 700 entrepreneurs and 300 investors from around the globe, we hope to highlight our commitment to building bridges that help us tackle global challenges together. Here at the State Department, as I think you saw, the Secretary this morning spoke at the Department's annual Pride at State event. He was joined by Special Envoy for the Human Rights of LGBTI persons, Randy Berry, and the Secretary of the Army, Eric Fanning, the first openly gay head of any service in the U.S. military. Pride at State is jointly organized by the Department of State and Gays and Lesbians and Foreign Affairs agencies, also known as GLIFA. Secretary Kerry used this opportunity to reaffirm his own commitment, and of course that of this department, to supporting diversity and to help further GLIFA's mission to secure fair treatment of LGBTI colleagues here in the United States and to support people struggling against discrimination and persecution abroad. Later today, the Secretary will deliver remarks at an event celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Harry S. Truman Scholarship Foundation. He'll be joined at that event by former Secretary of State and President of the Truman Foundation, Madeleine Albright. I think you are very familiar with the Truman Foundation. And then lastly, bit of trivia. And I think we got this back to you, Matt, but I wanted to publicly talk about how why it's 1975.
It's very interesting, actually.
So-
Thank you for.
Yeah, actually, I was interested to learn it. But Matt's question yesterday was why does our count of refugees only go back to 1975? And I had no idea. So the answer is, prior to 1975, individuals with protection concerns were admitted to the United States under a variety of immigration categories, which generally included various types of parole, not the legal kind of parole that we're used to hearing about, and or ad hoc legislation that was directed at specific categories of vulnerable groups. After the fall of Saigon in April of 1975 and the consequent outflow from Vietnam of Vietnamese and other groups of people that lived in the region, new legislation was passed authorizing the adjustment of status of Indo-Chinese originally paroled into the United States to refugees after March of 1975. So the same legislation was followed by the Refugee Act of 1980, which codified the refugee admissions process that had been in place since 1975, went back 5 years. So this is why we start to record formal refugee admissions beginning in 1975. So this is a great question, forced us all to learn a little something, and I wanted to pass that on to everybody. It forced all of us but Justin to learn a little something.
Justin knows everything. He's omniscient.
Oh, you knew it too?
Justin knew it, so did
So as long as
I
Justin
actually-
knew it.
I wish I was here yesterday.
I was going to actually.
shared it.
I think we all would have appreciated that, Justin.
I was actually going to begin this by thanking you guys for getting back to me with that answer because it was interesting.
It was a good question. Okay, Matt, what can we do for you?
Yeah, two logistical things. One, on the Shannon trip to Venezuela, I realize you can't say 100% who he's going to see, but I mean, do you expect him to see President Maduro?
What I can tell you is that a potential meeting with President Maduro is not confirmed at this time. So I can't rule it out, but it's not. There's no confirmed meeting with President Maduro right now.
Well, I mean, why would he go if there wasn't?
Well, there's plenty of other government officials and civil society and opposition members that are worth speaking to and talking to. And part of this, as I said, is an outgrowth of the 14 June meeting, where the secretary made clear that we were going to continue to do what we could to foster meaningful, constructive dialogue there. And it doesn't. So there's plenty of people with whom to do
understand
that.
But when the invitation was made, did they say, "Hey, come on down and you can see the president"?
I don't believe the invitation was,
That's
you'll
specific.
definitely get a meeting with President Maduro. Obviously, we're hopeful for that, but
Okay.
it hasn't been
So
confirmed.
it would, if such a meeting did not happen, it would be a bit of a disappointment. Yeah.
I think obviously we'd like to see a meeting with President Maduro, but that doesn't mean that if it doesn't happen that the trip is a failure.
Well, I'm not saying a failure.
No, I know, but would we like to see that? Yes, of course, but it's not confirmed yet.
When did Caracas extend the invitation?
As I understand it, it was at the OAS
At
meeting
that-
in Santo
at that
Domingo.
meeting.
Yeah, to my understanding, that's when the invitation was proffered.
And was there any back and forth on exactly whom Mr. Shannon would meet?
Not at that
during-
time, Roz. I mean, this was an initial invitation to come down and to have a dialogue, and obviously we accepted that invitation. But as one of the reasons why I'm not at liberty to go into every single person with whom he's meeting is because some of the agenda is still being fleshed out. Again, I fully expect that we'll be able to read out his visit. He's there for 2 days, today and tomorrow, and we'll have, I'm sure, more to say as time goes on.
What is his goal for this round of
That's-
meetings? Given the tensions between these two governments, what is his goal for these 2 days?
The main purpose is to have a series of discussions about the social, economic, and political challenges in Venezuela, and to try to help foster constructive, meaningful dialogue towards solutions with a variety of groups in the government and outside the government. And that has been Secretary Kerry's focus for quite some time here, is that the Secretary firmly believes, and he stressed this in Santo Domingo, that the best way forward is a strong, robust, productive dialogue with all the stakeholders. And to the degree the United States can be helpful in helping foster that dialogue, well, we want to be. We also recognize that it can't really be meaningful and productive unless it's happening amongst the parties. And again, that's what Ambassador Shannon is going down there to try to help foster.
Is the ambassador taking any offers of emergency food aid, given that people have been storming supermarkets in Caracas?
No, he did not bring with him food aid or material assistance.
Did you say social, economic, and political challenges?
Social,
I
economic,
just wondered if
and political
was in there.
challenges, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So secondly, on the just logistics, I'm wondering, since yesterday and the Secretary said he was going to meet with the authors of the Syria Descent Channel cable. Has that happened yet? Do you expect that it would, if it hasn't, is this something that would wait until after there's a response from policy planning? Or has it been scheduled? What's the situation with that meeting?
He did meet with a small number of them this morning, mid-morning, for about a half an hour. It was approximately 10 of the authors. As you can imagine, the group is sizable, so it wasn't possible to meet with everybody. But he did have a collegial discussion with them this morning.
What did he say?
Because the Dissent Channel memo and the contents of it are meant to be privately conveyed, so too, I'm afraid, are going to have to be the discussions around it. So I'm not going to be able to characterize the content of the Secretary's conversation with them because we want to respect the confidentiality of the process. It was, however, I believe the Secretary came away feeling that it was a good discussion. It was worth having. He appreciated their views, and just as critically, their firm belief in the opportunity that they have to express those views. And so they had a good 30-minute or more conversation.
Right, but I'm not asking for the content. I mean, we all know what the content is, and kind of dancing around this. I mean, it's been published at,
I understand that, but I have to
but
respect
I
the
understand
process,
that.
regardless of.
I get it, but I mean, it's just this kind of, I don't know, kabuki dance we're doing here, because you know very well what's in it, and it's out there in public. It's not a secret, even though it may be, parts of it might be classified by this. But anyway, I'm not trying to get into the content. With whatever the content was, did the Secretary say that he agreed with him?
Again, I'm not going to characterize the discussion much more than I did, and I know that that's not going to meet with your approbation. But
let's put it this.
Let me do this. So I can tell you a couple of things. He thanked them for expressing their views.
Yeah.
And for using the Dissent Channel, and he reaffirmed his strong belief in the value of the Dissent Channel, which we've talked about quite a bit here. So he thanked them for expressing their views, for using the Dissent Channel to do that. He made clear that he takes the Dissent Channel seriously, and he took their views seriously. And also made clear that that he read their message with sincerity, and again, without talking about the specific detail of it, the Secretary also walk them through his own thought process with respect to this particular issue and the efforts that he's been expending on this particular issue.
Did he
And
give-
why those efforts were still so very important.
Did he give them any indication that he would incorporate their, incorporate their views into his thinking as he goes around and helps the president and the rest of the administration try to formulate a policy? Or,
Well, there
Revise it.
already is a policy.
oh, yeah?
And
What is it
if-
exactly?
Come on, I've
Look,
been
the
talking
entire
about the
point-
policy
entire
for
point
months
of
up
the-
here.
but
I
the
can't believe
entire
you want me
point
to
of this-
actually
The
restate
entire
it.
point of this cable was to say that the policy, such as it is, these people think is not a good one, is not going in the right direction, and they've recommended changes. So the question is, did the secretary, without getting into the content of what it is, did the secretary tell them that, when he saw them this morning, that he was willing to take their suggestions, their ideas on board in his broader discussions within the administration about what to do?
You're asking me again to talk about the content of the discussion, and I can't do that, Matt. But let me put that in a box for a second, separate and distinct. When you guys have asked me about the issue of Syria and what's going on in Syria, I'm not confirming the topic of the message was or the topic of the discussion, but when you have asked me in the past,
You're not confirming.
when
it
you
was
have
not
asked me,
Syrian.
when you have asked me about what's going on in Syria, I have said now for many weeks that while we continue to believe that the best solution is going to be a political solution, that there is no military solution to the conflict in Syria, the civil conflict in Syria, but that it would be imprudent and irresponsible for this administration not to consider other options, and those other options are still and have been and are still being considered.
All right, fine, but surely you're not trying to say that this dissent cable could have been about Paraguay, are you?
Can
No.
I-
I mean, you're not, I mean, why?
I have
are you saying
acknowledged
that it is about
at the
Syria?
outset
Okay,
that
last
the
one.
original, the main topic area was on Syria,
Last
but
one.
I'm
Did
not
he-
going to talk about the specifics
did
of
he-
what they recommended.
Okay, and I'm not asking that. Did he ask them to come back with him with more, perhaps more detail?
I'm not aware of any such request.
Thank you.
Process question?
Well,
Does the secretary?
Hang on, everybody,
Yeah,
just-
does
we'll
the
get there.
secretary's meeting, does whatever happened in that meeting have to be read out, as it were, to the policy planning folks who are tasked with responding to this dissent message?
No, because the policy planning director was in the meeting this morning, so there's no reason to have it read out.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, was it proper at this point in the process? Someone files a message through this dissent channel, and policy planning is supposed to respond to it.
Are you
Was
asking, is it okay
appropriate?
to
Was
have
it-
the meeting before
Well,
responses given?
right,
As I understand
right.
the response is, if not done, very near done. So there wasn't really an issue in terms of timing, in terms of meeting with these individuals. The secretary read the memo, decided he wanted to meet with some of them. We scheduled the meeting, even as the policy planning group was working on the official response, which, as I said, if it's not done, and I can check on this before the end of the day, if it's not done, it will be done very, very soon.
Were all 10 of the people whom he met with who signed the cable, were they all people who work here at Maine State, or did any people come back from overseas?
It's my understanding that they worked here at Maine State. I'm not aware of any travel that was done as a result of that.
Thank you.
without getting into, the substance in terms of, what was in the memo, was this just a discussion for him to thank them? Or was this kind of a substantive discussion of the particular points of their dissent channel and the recommendations that they made and whether, what the secretary thought of each individual point? Like, was it a discussion about policy, or was it just a kind of thank you, I appreciate your views?
It was both. I mean, he thanked them for expressing their views. Again, expressed confidence in his respect of the dissent channel process. But sure, they talked about the thoughts that were proffered in the dissent channel message, and they had comprehensive discussion about that. I
Was
think
it
the
like
way
a
I would
back and forth?
describe.
Would you call it a back and forth?
Yes, of course it was, but the secretary was largely in listening mode. I mean, the purpose was to hear them out, even more. But yes, there was a give and take of the
Okay,
conversation.
so was this in a show of respect, or can you honestly say that you think that their views will play into the policy process? Because everything that we hear from the White House and such, it doesn't seem that well.
Well, again, without getting into debating specific policies here from the podium, I'd say it was both, Elise. I mean, certainly it was a show of respect for the process itself and for their willingness to put down on paper their views. So he was showing respect for that, for their process and for them. But he also, the secretary very well, wanted to have a good conversation about their views in general. And largely, as I said, he was in the listening mode. He asked a lot of questions. He wanted to draw out more of their thoughts on these things. And he came away feeling like he had a good opportunity to do that.
So that's much more than like him meeting with them to thank them for their views. I mean, you're suggesting that this meeting, that he met with them, maybe the dissent cable was the genesis of these people sharing their views with him, but you're saying that this is just like meeting with other officials that deal with, on this issue, that you think that might play into, his own policy papers.
I didn't say, and I won't speculate as to discussions going forward with respect to what we're doing in Syria or decisions that may or may not get made, either as a result of this message or as a result of ongoing routine discussions that have been had and continue to be had on alternatives. So I'm not going to speculate about the role that this message might play one way or the other. But if you're asking me, was this just a show for the secretary, the answer is absolutely not. I mean, certainly he wanted to thank them and pay respect to the process because this is an important issue. But he also didn't waste time in terms of hearing them out and asking questions and listening to their views and asking them to expound on them further. I mean, that's the way the secretary likes to conduct meetings and discussions and to inform himself. And again, I think he found the meeting useful in that regard. But I wouldn't begin to speculate one way or another what this conversation today or that message did last week in terms of altering, changing any of the thinking going forward. As I said last week, nobody is content with the status quo on the ground. And the administration has been looking at other options with respect to Syria for quite some time. This is not new. And yes, some of those options have included the potential for military initiatives. Again, that's nothing new. So all these things.
Some of the things in the memo, and I know you don't want to get into it, are areas where the secretary himself has advocated on their behalf. So if the secretary and the secretary of state and the top U.S. diplomat of this country is not able to sway the president on a certain course, do you really expect that 50 mid-level officials are going to be able to do that?
Again, I'll let the author speak for their intent, their motivations. That's for them to speak to. I'm also not going to discuss whatever views the secretary may present in private to other members of the cabinet or to the president. I think you can see in his actions and his travel and the meetings that he's having that the secretary is very committed to trying to work on what you guys have colloquially termed as Plan A, which is getting a transitional governing process in place, getting the political talks back on track, getting the cessation of hostilities enforced nationwide in an enduring way, and getting humanitarian assistance to the still millions of Syrians in need. Those are still the three things that we're working on. That is still the approach we're pursuing. And everything you've seen out of Secretary Kerry supports that.
With the 10 he met, the last people he's going to meet on this, so because there were more than 10 who signed the thing, I assume they're on post somewhere or just not.
Not
available
all of
today.
the authors, as I understand it, are in Washington, D.C. He met with a small group of them, about
Make
10.
secure calls to any of the others.
I'm not aware of any other direct communications
And the
with
10
the
that were
authors.
picked were just because they were available here. They're not particularly senior or not seen as the driving force. behind
They,
this.
they were a representative group that he could meet with
Give
here
us
in
a steer
Washington.
on what kind of seniority they have without identifying them. Can you say
No, I'd rather not.
broadly? Okay.
So in this response that the policy planning committee is, or the policy planning office is supposed to respond to, are they supposed to respond that their views, that the views of the cable are taken into account? Is it supposed to be a rebuttal or an acceptance? I mean, what is the kind of process of responding? What is it about? You said it's a process of response is.
Well, look, in general, every time, this isn't the only one
I
that we've
understand.
gotten this year. You typically get 4 to 5 per year. And each response is different because each dissent channel message is different. So there's no template, as I understand it. There's no template for how to respond. And again, I'm not going to speak to the specifics of this response, but
Does it
I
have
can assure you.
actionable I guess my question is, does it have actionable things, or it's, like when you respond to, Congress and you're like, have actionable things that they're asking for, or is it, thank you for your note, we appreciate it, we take your points? How substantive is the response?
I'm not going to characterize the response, Elise, but I can tell you that it will be a serious, sober response to the concerns that were expressed by the authors of the Sent Channel message. I'm just not going to go into more detail than that.
From a historical perspective, can you say whether this secretary or any prior secretary has ever met with people who have filed something through the dissent channel?
I have
Do you
no
know?
idea,
Well,
Roz.
you have the Senate awards, or don't you have the Senate awards? Absolutely.
I have no
Secretary does
idea,
something.
and I don't know if there would be any way to even answer that. I just don't know. I don't know.
Could you just take the question, though? I'm just curious,
I'll-
whether
Roz,
this is a real
I'll try
one-off.
I'll try it, but I'm not making any promises. I mean, you're
Yeah.
asking for
I don't think it's on purpose.
historical record that I don't even know we have in terms of, how many secretaries have met with dissenters face to face and over what issues. I'll ask the question, but I don't have high confidence that we'll be able to answer it for you.
Well, if you could try.
I was here.
We'll give it a shot.
Okay.
Elizabeth wrote it down.
Okay.
All right, this will be the shortest briefing ever.
Can I move on to Sentinel? And
Yeah.
forgive me if I missed it and you addressed it yesterday, but did you ever get clarity on when it was actually created? You remember we
Best I
asked that
know was
question, you s-
1971 was the first one. I don't know when, how soon before that it was stood up. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember we had asked that. It's kind of water under the bridge because I had to write my story without knowing that. But you said it was 1971, then you said it was Dean Rusk, who was obviously no longer Secretary of State then.
Thank
I
you
was
for
just thinking,
reminding me of
well,
my
this
historical
is-
amnesia. Okay, but I will find out, Arshad, the best
Okay,
I can,
thank you.
when it was started.
Did you say when the response was going to happen?
I know they're working on the response. I'm given to understand it's, if not done, very close to being done. And when I get closure on that, I'll let you know.
So it could be today.
Could be today.
Amnesia, it's not amnesia unless you actually did know it at one point.
But I don't know that. Maybe I did. Maybe I actually did know and forgot it.
Can I go on to Bahrain unless I'm more than willing?
Justin, do you know the answer?
Of course I
Can you enlighten us?
did. What's the question?
That is a classic Justin Fischel response. Yeah.
On North Korea, there are reports that the North Koreans are possibly going to launch a missile later today. Do you have any reaction to that?
I have nothing to confirm the veracity of those reports. We've seen them just like you have. We don't talk about intelligence matters one way or the other. The only thing I'd say is what we say and have said all too often, which is this is the time for the DPRK to stop the provocations to work towards stability on the peninsula. These kinds of actions, if and when it happens again, do nothing to increase the security on the peninsula and fly in the face of their international obligations.
Are you
Samir?
in communication with Japanese counterparts about the potential launch?
I'm not going to talk about intelligence matters. Obviously, we stay in routine touch with our Japanese allies as well as our South Korean allies with respect to provocations by the North. There's a routine in many levels, military and diplomatic, many channels through which we stay in direct communication with them. We're obviously monitoring the situation as best we can and as closely as we can, and we do that in concert with both our Japanese and South Korean allies. But I don't have any more specific than that. Samir?
Any reaction to the Boeing deal with Iran?
I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I can tell you that the State Department welcomes Boeing's announcement of this deal with Iran Air, which involves the type of permissible business activity envisioned in the JCPOA. Boeing has been in close contact with the State Department regarding this deal. We committed, as you know, to license sales of civil passenger aircraft and will continue to implement this in all of our JCPOA commitments. The JCPOA provides an opening for civil aviation companies, including American companies, to pursue legitimate commerce with Iran, and we note reports of progress in the aviation sector, which is good both for both the economy and for public safety. Okay?
John, on this, while it is true that the nuclear deal allows for this, I'm wondering if you're aware of any other case where Boeing or another U.S. civilian aircraft manufacturer has been given a license to sell planes to a country that is designated a state sponsor of terrorism. You'll recall that there are Sudan. I don't know that there are many Boeing planes flying around Sudan or Syria for that matter. And I don't think that the North Koreans, when they were on the list, had any American planes. Do you know, is this an unprecedented thing to sell?
I'm certainly not aware of another example in the way you characterize it, but I would like to, if you could, just let me talk about this with a little bit more depth. So I don't know the answer to your question that it's ever happened before, quite the way you describe it.
Well,
But
what do you mean the way I described it?
as you know, licensing to a state sponsor of terrorism.
But that's what happened, isn't it?
No, but it's all. But again,
I know it's
again,
legal under the JCPOA, but
the
there's still
JCPOA
a state,
specifies that
there's still a state sponsor of terrorism, and I'm just asking you if you know of any other case where the U.S. government has permitted the sale of American planes, civilian aircraft.
I'm not aware of any, but again, let me stress that the JCPOA states that any license for such aviation sales, and this is a quote, will include appropriate conditions to ensure that licensed activities do not involve and no licensed aircraft, goods, or services are resold or retransferred to any person on the SDN, the special designated list. Should the United States determine that licensed aircraft, goods, or services have been used for purposes other than exclusively civil aviation end use, or have been resold or retransferred to persons on the designated list, the United States would view this as grounds to cease performing its commitments under the aviation section in whole or in part.
Does that mean that Iran Air would have to sell these planes? What if they just lent them to another aircraft?
Resold or retransferred to.
Okay, so any kind of
Yes.
lending
Yes.
is out of the question.
Yes.
What happens if is flying flights into Damascus with these planes? Would that be okay? In the current recognizing that it's going to be a while before they get delivered, but in the current situation, if a 777 or a 737 was sold to Iran Air and they started flying whatever into Damascus, would that be grounds for the license to be?
I'll have to take that question. I'm not sure, but again, going back to the language, it's talking about reselling or retransferring. It's not talking about the transportation of the use of civil aviation to transport passengers to and fro.
Right, but there's been
I
a lot
see
of
nothing in
allegations
there.
that a lot of passengers on some Iranian airlines flying from Tehran into Syria and Beirut, other places have been carrying not just ordinary passengers and not just ordinary cargo. But I'm just wondering if those kinds of flights, or to say North Korea, for example, which is no longer a state sponsor of terrorism, but would that
I'm not
be-
an expert on that particular, you're asking a very legal question that I will take and get back to you rather than speculate. But again, the JCPOA is clear about reselling and retransferring or repurposing for anything other than civil aviation. It's very, very clear. So.
Okay,
I'll take
and,
it.
and as we understand it, under the terms of the deal, it could be worth up to about $25 billion. Is there any provision in this or in the government's license that would prevent or stop U.S. money from going to help pay for these?
Say that one again.
Is there any possibility that American money, U.S. money, in the form of, I don't know, subsidies or some kind of payment, whether it's taxpayer money or not, could be Boeing itself, could be used in this sale?
I don't believe so, but let me check.
Is misuse of the planes once they get to Iran, is Boeing in any way liable for that, or have they got to, you'll punish Iran under the JCPOA, but would Boeing share any liability for end use?
You'll have to let me check, Dave. You guys are asking me questions of a legal nature that I'm not schooled on, and I'm not going to speculate.
For that list, when Matt asked you about whether any U.S. government monies would be used in the sale, can you explicitly check whether any guarantees from the U.S. government export credit guarantee organization, I forget what the exact name of it is, maybe the Exim Bank, but whether there are any U.S. government export guarantees that are supporting the sale?
We'll take the question. You guys are asking very detailed questions I just don't have information on.
Not like you haven't had time.
That's right. You're absolutely.
We've been asking about this for 4 weeks.
You're right.
Anyway,
No,
thank you.
All
Thank you
good
for-
questions. We'll
no,
take
but
them.
thank you
I'm
for
not
taking-
challenging that. Just don't know the answers. Okay.
No, Bahrain. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Japan after that.
Go ahead.
I have one on Japan.
Japan. Go ahead.
Assistant Secretary Russell's in Japan for the U.S. Japan-India trilateral. Do you have any readouts for the dialogue?
I don't at this time, but I'm sure we'll get something as a result of it. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you if there's any update on the Bahrain report to the Hill.
No.
No.
You asked if there's an update. No, there's no
Tick
update.
tock, tick tock. Okay.
As I said yesterday, we're mindful that we're
maybe by
late.
January 21st.
We are
or
working
so,
on it very, very hard. I suspect that we'll have something
And
done soon.
There have been reports this morning that the Bahraini government has called the National Guard out into the streets. You've seen this? Is this?
Seen the reports, can't confirm it. We're in touch with the Post, trying to get a better sense of what's going on, but I can't confirm those reports.
Okay, but as you will recall, the removal of the military from the streets had been one of the big accomplishments, as it were, of the dialogue. So, is this something that you would warn against, or tell the Bahrainis that you think is a?
I think we need to know more about the veracity of the reports before we jump to a conclusion. But you're right. I mean, it was the use of and presence of actions of security forces that certainly caused alarm, particularly back in 2011. But again, we just don't know the veracity of the reports, and so I think we're going to reserve jumping to any conclusions or making specific comments about it until we know more about these reports.
So, am I hearing that right? That you're going to wait until after they do it or
No,
don't
no,
do
no,
it
no.
to say anything?
No, I didn't say that. I said we're looking into it right now. We're trying to figure out ground truth here,
Right.
and then when we do, then we'll figure out what the next best step is to do there. But obviously, we're very mindful of the fact that it was security forces that were the problem back in 2011. And as you know, when we lifted some of the sanctions, we left some in place on some security forces. So it's not like we're unmindful of the potential here, but I just don't want to jump to any conclusions.
Well, is that because you think that there might be some validity, or that it could be that it would be okay for them to?
No, it's because
call
we
the
just
National Guard?
no, it's because we just
Well,
don't
then
know.
why wouldn't you say, "Hey, Bahrain, we think that it would be about we're seeing
Because we
reports."
don't even know if these reports are accurate. So I think it's pretty safe to assume, Matt, that if we have concerns, we'll express them. We express them
Well, wouldn't you
privately,
be
we express them
concerned about the
publicly.
possibility that
Well,
it could happen?
obviously, we're concerned by the reports. I mean, that's why we're looking into it.
I mean,
But
you
I just don't have
you
anything.
don't know that North Korea is about to launch another missile, but you just called on them not to do it. Why wouldn't you, here's a situation where there are reports that this is going to.
I don't know that I would put the two in exactly the same
No, I'm
category,
talking
Matt.
about things that haven't happened yet that you would warn against, right?
Why don't we see what's going on, and then we'll determine the
So,
right
in other
response
words,
for that.
there is a scenario in which they could call out the National Guard to go into the street, and you guys wouldn't have an issue with it. Is that correct?
It depends on the usage.
Right.
If it
So
was in
there
fact
is a
happening.
scenario that would
Again,
be
I'm not
okay.
going to speculate about something we don't even know is happening yet. So let's figure out what's going on, and then we'll respond appropriately. Thank you, everybody.